You're starting to see now the blueprints and the outlines of plans on how leagues will resume. And I want to get into the NBA because they were the latest one to make some noise about their returning, what it would look like, and how they would do it. And at least on Tuesday, you had Rockets owner Tillman Fertitta. He was on CNBC, and he was discussing, what a possible return could look like, what the timeline, what the dates could be. And he believes, and he said on CNBC that he believes the NBA will resume, assuming the virus continues the downturn that it has. It seems like, July is going to be that sweet spot to where the NBA could really, really start, getting players back to training and really start to get the wheels turning to resume in some way, whether it's the regular season or it's the postseason. And Tillman Fertitta made a comment saying about that, as the virus continues to be on the downturn, assuming it does, we should be back up and running and finish the season. And he said, and he believes that regular season games will be played before the playoffs. And while the league still is formally deciding, they haven't, announced a formal plan of how they'll return, whether it's going right to the playoffs, having a playing tournament, having the regular season resume. There's nothing out there yet. But I'll say this, and I'll caution the NBA. They would be foolish, absolutely foolish, to resume the regular season. Instead, they should go right to the playoffs. Whenever the league starts, whenever the season starts, July 1st, July 15th, whenever they want to resume it and feel safe in doing so, they need to go right to the playoffs, and here's why. Number one, the playoffs are where the real money is. Now, if you look at the league advertising revenue, 62% of that league advertising revenue that they make a year, 62% of it comes from the playoffs. So obviously, we talk about, a lot of fans maybe don't pay attention to the NBA in the regular season, kind of get apathetic, and then, they just kind of, are in it for the first few months and then kind of take a downturn until April comes, until the playoffs come. That's when they really get locked back in and are watching every single game every single night. Well, guess what? Advertisers realize that too. They're going to save a lot of their money for the playoffs when they know the ratings are higher, when they know the attention is higher, and they know people are going to be watching. So 62% of the of the yearly league ad revenue is in the playoffs. Can't afford to lose that money. That's a large, significant chunk of ad revenue money that you have to be able to hold on to. So that's number one. Speaking of that, let's put a number. So TV revenue for the playoffs, the NBA rakes in $900 million. So $900 million is lost in TV revenue if the playoffs are canceled or not played. And why would they be canceled? Why would they not be played? Well, this goes into what I'm discussing. Because right now, at least, if the NBA was to resume the regular season, there's a major risk, and there's more teams there that you could risk getting players sick. And if the coronavirus spreads league-wide to where 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 full teams can't play, well, guess what? The league's going to get canceled. So right now, the big question and the main motivation for the league resuming to play regular season games is so that these regional sports networks, their regular season contracts could be fulfilled. The magic number, if you've seen or not aware at least, is 70 games. That's really what these regional sports networks, whether it's MSG here in New York, whether it's Spectrum Sports Network out in Los Angeles, whatever locally television network you watch to watch your favorite team locally. Well, those TV providers have contracts, and that contract usually is for 70 games in the regular season. So right now, the NBA is really trying to get as close to that number as possible, so obviously they lose less money. But this is why I think those contracts shouldn't be stressed about too much, and really, again, the TV revenue, which is $900 million, and the league ad revenue, which is 62% of that league ad revenue comes from the playoffs, it should be important to realize this. Settlements still could be made, right? Let's say, for example, I was looking at the Knicks schedule earlier today. They played 64 games on MSG this year. So that means they have to play 6 more games in order to reach that 70 mark threshold. A team like the Celtics, they played 54 games on NBC Sports Boston. So they have, obviously a long ways to go. They have about 16 games or so to make up in order to reach that 70-game threshold. Now, to me, it doesn't make any sense if you're going to play these games just to get to that 70-game mark. I think you can make settlements, which is when everything I've read so far that doesn't seem to be off the table. The NBA wants to go to these regional sports networks and say, listen, we can't resume the regular season. The playoffs are too costly in order to risk missing. So we'll settle here. We owed you, 14 games on, for this team. Maybe, we'll pay a 7. Obviously, everyone right now is suffering with the pandemic and the coronavirus. This is something that we didn't see coming. Obviously, it's not ideal, but we're all suffering. We'll give you 7 games. You can make settlements in order to fix this issue to make sure you don't lose league revenue next year and you don't lose a chunk of it this year. And I'll throw this out there, too. I'll throw one caveat in. let's just say that's not a non-starter, right? The Celtics, let's say, play 54 games, like I just mentioned, NBC Sports Boston. They want to get as close to that 70 number as possible, right? So they didn't want to pay 16 games out to NBC Sports Boston. Maybe they were like, all right, I'd rather pay 10. You can play regular season games between playoff teams. I'm for that. My whole thing is you got to only allow 16 teams when the league resumes, when play resumes, into the bubble, which we'll discuss in a second here. So you can play regular season games if you want between all the playoff teams that are going to qualify, but you cannot bring all 30 teams back, run through the rest of the regular season. Where again, some teams are playing about 15 to 18 games each per team, depending on again what their schedule is. So it's still a decent amount of games that have to be played. So you can play regular season games if you want, but only limit those regular season games to playoff teams. So, example, the Celtics would be in this mix. Let's say Boston plays 10 games on NBC Sports Network. All right, you're at 64. Now you're only playing NBC Sports Boston, let's say 6 or 7 games that you weren't able to fulfill that contract. Because this is why. This is the main reason. Players are going to get sick. Adam Silver said this when he was on a call with the players a few weeks ago. He said, quote, no decision will be risk-free, end quote. And he's right. Until there's a vaccine, until there's an antidote, you risk going out there and getting sick. It's why baseball, they have the same issue. Hockey, the NFL, all have the same issue. There's no guarantee that players won't get sick. So how can you mitigate the risk as much as possible, and how can you prevent the spread as much as possible? So right now, at least the NBA, that their main plan right now, and at least what they're trying to discuss, planning obviously ton of testing, possibly daily, possibly twice daily, again, to make sure that they identify sick players as soon as possible to prevent the spread. And they're not right now, at least, planning on stopping the league if a player gets sick. Maybe you hear some rumors that maybe it'll be a day or two, but it's going to be quick. They're not going to quarantine for 2 weeks, or the league is not going to get shut down like we already saw when one player gets sick in Rudy Gobert. So if they're resuming, they are going to go full throttle. They're going to go through with this, and really, unless maybe entire teams get sick and the entire league gets sick, that's really the only thing seeming right now that will stop the league from playing a full season. So speaking of which, so if they're going to resume, it's going to be, as we see, in 1 or 2 quote-unquote bubble cities. Right now, at least some reports coming out yesterday, Disney World is the front runner to be the main location. So every team that's going to resume play, that's going to be playing the rest of the season, will go to Disney World. They'll train there. They'll have conditioning. They'll have training camp, and then they will resume however they want to resume, regular season, postseason, at Disney World. But guess what? So if you're going to put every team in one city, doesn't it make the most sense to shrink the pool as much as possible so that there's less players, less coaches, less training staff that are out there that could possibly get sick and spread the virus? So to me, you look at that. 16 teams is way easier to test, to identify players getting sick, and again, to prevent the disease from spreading. It's so much easier to keep 16 teams safe compared to 30 teams. I mean, you basically double the workforce and the amount of people that are there. So if you can keep it as small as possible, you can, again, really limit yourself and not stretching yourself out too far to where you are only worrying about 16 teams, 12 players in each team, plus coaches, plus staff. It's so much easier to me, in my mind, to keep 16 teams healthy than it is to 30 teams. So again, that goes back to my point. If they have to play some regular season games, do it with just the playoff teams. Top 8 in each league right now. All right, bring them to Orlando. Maybe have the East play the West so that there's no competitive disadvantage to where the Celtics are playing the Raptors, let's say, and you look at the seeding, okay, those two are probably going to line up to play a first-round series. Well, obviously, they're not going to give you anything away, so maybe the game isn't as good, or maybe, the Stars don't even play, and in that way they can't get the rust off. Play East versus West. Have the Celtics play, the Mavericks, and then have them play the Jazz, and have them play the Lakers for 5, 6, 7, 10 games if they want. However many games that they want to play in the regular season, kind of get as close to 70 as possible. Because guess what? The bad teams, they're not on national TV a lot. So guess what? They don't have a lot of games to make up. Like I said, the Knicks aren't on national TV a lot. They've played 65 games, 64 games on MSG. So they only have 4 or 5 games that they're not going to deliver the contract on. So if you got to settle, it's not that expensive compared to a team like the Celtics, like I said, who's played 54 games on their local TV provider. So limit the amount of people that are going to get sick and going to get exposed. That's why, to me, making sure and going right to the playoffs and only worrying about 16 teams makes the most sense. And finally, if there is concern or if there is a hope that you want to try to make this season as normal as possible, meaning you're going to try to play as close to 82 games as possible, you want to have the full playoff bracket play out, fine. But if you're worried that, a team will get in the playoffs and maybe didn't deserve to get in the playoffs, or a team didn't get a fair shake in making the playoffs, and maybe they'll put an asterisk on the NBA Finals. It's not worth it, because you look at right now, you look at especially the bottom of each conference. The East is pretty much locked in. For the most part, you have the Magic and the Nets 7-8 are fighting for positioning, but for the most part, I mean, I believe it's the Wizards are 5 games out. They're not going to make the playoffs, and if they do, they're going to get swept in the first round. The West now is interesting, and it's very it's highly contested. You have currently the Grizzlies in 8th place, but you have the Pelicans, you have the Blazers, you have the Kings, you have the Spurs, all right there, all battling for that 8th seed, and they're all within 4 games. So it's highly contested. Don't get me wrong, but does it really matter, honestly, who the 8th seed is? I mean, since back in 2003, since the first round went to 7 games, there's been 4, 7, or 8 seeds total that have won a first-round series since 2003. It doesn't happen that often. And now is not the year, with all the circumstances that are going on, to try to make sure that these teams get an equal shot at making the playoffs. Whether it's the Grizzlies, whether it's the Pelicans, the Spurs, the Kings. Does anyone really think these teams are going to beat the Lakers? I don't. So there's no real point in trying to resume the league in order to make sure, give these teams a fair chance of making the playoffs. You had 80% of the season to do so. Couldn't do it. Congrats to the Grizzlies. If it was me, I would put them in the playoffs right now, and then have them lose in 4 or 5 games to the Lakers. So at least when I'm looking at the landscape right now of how the coronavirus is in this country, again, the spread is still pretty easy. Bringing back all 30 teams to play 15, 17 regular season games in order to fulfill those regional sports network contracts, just to save a few extra bucks, to me is not worth putting the playoffs in jeopardy, which is the real moneymaker. 62% of league ad revenue for the entire year comes from the playoffs. And if the playoffs aren't played, $900 million in TV revenue is lost, is gone just like that, in a league that is bleeding cash right now. You have to protect your cash cow. You have to protect your baby. That is the playoffs. So cut the league in half, bring 16 teams down to Orlando, to Disney World, to play in order to keep them as safe as possible and to ensure that the playoffs are played in full. In full. That's what you have to make sure about, because right now, again, with how much money that the league is losing, you'd be absolutely foolish to do anything to put the playoffs at risk, because guess what? If you resume the regular season, play, let's say, in the Knicks or the Cavaliers get sick, spreads it to his team, you don't catch it till after the game. They play, let's say, the Raptors or the Celtics or the Pacers. And all of a sudden, 5 or 6 Pacers players get sick, and now all of a sudden they can't play as a team. There's not enough players to play for 2 weeks. What happens? That's the thing the NBA has to worry about. 1 or 2 players, they can survive. They can just keep on going, which they already said they're going to keep on going. I'm not sure what the league can do contingency-wise if an entire team or teams get sick to where they can't play for at least 2 weeks. That is something that NBA does not want to get into or not have to worry about, which is why bringing back all 30 teams, way too risky. Start with the playoffs, go right to the playoffs, bring 16 teams down. If you want to play regular season, fine. Play a regular season, 5, 10 games, only with the teams that are in the playoffs, that qualify for the playoffs. Because again, 16 is way easier to keep safe than 30. So I'm curious, would the NBA be making a mistake in your mind if they don't go straight to the playoffs? Would you want to see them resume the regular season? If you're a Knicks fan, do you want to see the Knicks, the godforsaken Knicks, play 15 more games on MSG, or do you want, just to go back to the playoffs? Because I think it would be absolutely foolish for the NBA to do anything right now but go right to the playoffs.